I'm delighted to host a fireside chat with a good friend of mine, who's an amazing woman, Caroline Gorski. Caroline, please come on stage. Everybody. Caroline is not only the new CEO of R Square Factory, I said it right,
You
right?
did, just
Yes,
about, yeah.
just
Yeah,
about. But she's an amazing woman with a fantastic career. Where did it all started for you, Caroline?
So that's a really good question. I want to be really honest and put my hands up right here straight away and say I'm an arts graduate. Anybody else in the room with an arts degree? Oh, thank God, my people. So I went into technology at a profoundly lucky time because my career really started in the mid-90s. I left university in 1995. And at that point, it was still possible to go into organizations and enthuse them about the potential of this brand spanking new technology, the World Wide Web. I kind of got the bug for technology. I got the bug for how technology changes businesses. I got the bug for how emerging technologies bring new opportunities, new markets that can be exploited, about how they change the way that people are and the way that people work. So the mobile internet, big data, VR, AR, artificial intelligence, new forms of communication, and that's really kind of where we end up with Rolls-Royce, I suppose, eventually.
Very interesting experience that you brought forward in 2022, where you have set up R Squared, and you're the CEO. How is this experience different for all the other jobs you've had, especially those require you to set up new ventures, develop new initiatives?
So I've been involved in a number of new ventures over my career, probably 4 or 5, usually as a member of the early team or occasionally as a member of the founding team. This is different. It's different when you're the CEO, which I hadn't really, I think, appreciated before. And the reason I say that is because although part of your job as a CEO is to find the most amazing founding team who can really bring your vision forward and make it land in the real world, and then wrap round that founding team the most extraordinary practitioners who can really deliver on that vision. The reality is, as the CEO, it's still your vision, and that can be quite lonely, particularly in the dark reaches of the nights when something that you've tried to do hasn't worked, perhaps the way that you hoped it would. How are we going to take it forward? I've had to learn really important lessons in how to lean into the team who support me, because that's not an easy thing to do when it's your baby that you're trying to bring into the world. But if you don't lean into that team, if you don't really benefit from all of that creativity and collaboration and vision that your team is able to bring to your initiative, then that loneliness never goes away, and actually your decision making becomes less and less reliable.
And collaboration is exactly the secret sauce needed for us to be able to solve the big societal problems we are now discussing at this conference and all of us, the race to net zero. So how can collaboration truly be that secret sauce that helps us to see progress with the solutions we're developing in climate change, but frankly, everything else, all the societal problems we have?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, we set up the R Squared factory in March of this year is when we launched, but we started building the capabilities, the competencies, the experiences that sit behind the R Squared factory all the way back in 2017. And they draw on more than 3 decades of experience in Rolls-Royce of using advanced data analytics to address really big systemic industrial problems. And that's really important, because the truth is that the problems we face today, particularly the problems around, how do we build more sustainable supply chains? How do we reduce carbon emissions? How do we get to a position where there is greater diversity and representation around the data streams that make decisions for our lives? How do we maintain inclusiveness not only within the Western world, across our diverse populations, but also into the global South? How do we take the benefits of the technologies that we are working with across the entire planet and not just limit them to a narrow group? Those are system-wide challenges. And no single industrial organization can start to solve them or certainly finish to solve them on its own. They don't control enough data. The data that they do control is not of the right kind of quality. It suffers from significant issues of data scarcity. They don't have access to enough of the right resources. And even if they did, they aren't able to define a problem clearly enough to be able to generate an effective answer unless they collaborate with the rest of the integrated system that is facing into that problem. So for us, if you want to start looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence to solve some of the world's biggest industrial problems, you have to do that from a basis of collaboration. So at the front end, you've got a problem which is about data, about the quality of data, about the scarcity of data, about the degree to which when you're looking at a problem where the answer you're building shows up physically in the real world, you cannot abstract that data away from the domain specialist knowledge of how it applies an answer. So that's the first set of problems. They're data-related problems. And the second set of problems is actually not to do with technology at all. It's cultural. It's about how do organizations get themselves into a position culturally and operationally where they're actually able to release value from the application of those machine learning techniques to the industrial problems. And my colleague Manisha was talking a little bit about cultural transformation earlier on this morning. Now, what we've learned across those 5 years in Rolls-Royce is that you can have the best data science community in the world, and we have a fabulous data science community in the R² factory. But quite frankly, if you don't invest in addressing the data problem and in addressing the culture problem, you could put your data scientists into a room with a mountain of 50-pound notes and a box of matches and probably some petrol, because they're not going to be able to generate value from the work that they're doing if those cultures don't change. Rolls-Royce and R² Data Labs specifically brought together the Emergent Alliance, which was a community of more than 50 organizations looking at how to use data science to develop ways to respond economically to the COVID-19 pandemic. How could we reduce the impact of the recession that we are now living through? How could we help planners to make decisions about how to switch economies back on faster, but in a way which was safe? That spirit of collaboration, those were 50 organizations who would normally have been in competition with each other, including 4 of the top 5 tech companies who generally don't collaborate with each other unless, there's a really important reason why they should. So we were hugely thrilled that we could help bring that group together, and we've taken learnings from that experience forward into the work that we deliver at the R² factory.
It's fantastic you brought us to our subject, but we wanted to present to you the whole context of R², so did you understand why they're so well positioned to address problems like sustainability. So talking about sustainability and ambition of Rolls-Royce to be one of the leaders in the field of sustainability, how does technology you've developed at Rolls-Royce aligns with this ambition and vision, and how technology should be one of the main driver in helping us achieving net zero?
Yeah, we're very clear, both within Rolls-Royce but in R² factory as well, that we genuinely don't believe that we will get to net zero without the application of artificial intelligence. And let me be very, very clear about that. The kinds of optimizations that we need to be able to operate across distributed energy networks, the kinds of ways we need to think about how we provide for the vital power that we still need, but doing so in a way which is sustainable and which massively reduces or reverses our dependence on carbon emitting power sources. Those challenges need artificial intelligence to be able to build out the flexibility, the agility, the responsiveness of the consumption networks and the generating networks that we need to be able to achieve that objective. We need artificial intelligence because we need to think about things like how do we control completely new modes of transport that have degrees of autonomy in them that will only be manageable using data science and machine learning. We need to think about how do we change our economy from a waste consumption perspective. And we're going to need artificial intelligence to understand how do we make the best choices about the raw materials that we choose to use, how we combine them to make new products, and then how we decombine them at end of life in order to feed them back into a circular system, to break the habit that we have of making things and throwing them away. So those are the kinds of challenges. They are system-wide challenges. They will need artificial intelligence to help answer them.
How did you achieve, or what's the type of solution you put together using artificial intelligence, but also all other capabilities, not just AI?
So when you think about industrial supply chains, generally speaking, most industrial supply chains are relatively complex. In the case of an industrial supply chain like Rolls-Royce, or indeed perhaps a pharmaceutical supply chain, or even an automotive or compute supply chain, so when you're thinking about the high compute supply chains, you're often dealing with very rare elements in those supply chains, rare raw materials, and you're sometimes dealing with very high-risk supply chains, i.e. you may only have one or two suppliers in the whole world who can actually make the components and products that you need to be able to create whatever it is that you're creating. That complexity, both in the rareness of the materials, in where they come from in the world, and in the relative scarcity of suppliers, can make it extremely difficult for human beings trying to make buying decisions just using their own brains to be able to optimize for really anything else other than perhaps cost, or possibly protecting supply. So you might be able to optimize for a combination of cost and risk of supply as a human. We worked with the buyers in Rolls-Royce to look at a number of our key strategic supply chain purchasing routes to understand how could we apply a machine learning optimization engine to not only allow them to optimize for cost, but also to optimize for the security of supply, to optimize for the geographic proximity of suppliers, and as a result to reduce carbon emissions from those key components by 40%. But also, critically important, the cost of sourcing those components by almost £200 million.
I want to go back to R squared and the ambition you have for the company. Where do you see R squared playing an important role in accelerating or being a big player in the race towards net zero? Where do you think you differentiate against your competitors? And frankly, in consulting, there's quite a bit of competition. I would know.
Absolutely.
There I work.
From our perspective, there are, I think, a couple of really important things that are different about the R squared factory. And the first is that we would not consider ourselves to be in direct competition with organizations like PwC because our model is based on collaboration. We genuinely believe that the way that you get to some of the answers around the biggest questions the world faces, industrial questions about the application of machine learning and AI, have to be through the collaboration between organizations who might perhaps have considered themselves to be in competition with each other before, but are prepared to set that competitive instinct aside because the scale of the problem is big enough that they know they need to work together to solve it. The R squared factory is a safe place to do hard things. That's what it exists for. It is a place to bring organizations together, to help them to think about how they can generate value not only for themselves, but also across their networks, across the value systems that they operate within, in order to solve some of those really big problems, like climate change, like sustainability across supply chains, like cultural transformation, like how do you build trustworthy and ethical artificial intelligences when you're trying to deploy them into physical processes.
Hi, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the AI ethics framework, how you developed that and some of the applications of it.
It's called the Alethea framework for anybody who wants to have a look for it. You can get hold of it on the Rolls-Royce.com website. We published it under Creative Commons license, so it's freely available, open source. We produced variant 2.0 December of this year just gone, where we also released a data bias framework as an additional element. Essentially, it is a very, very practical 32 ethic checklist, which allows you as an AI developer, and some of my development team are here and can tell you about how they use it, but it allows you as an AI developer to think about the questions you need to ask yourself to demonstrate that an AI application is being developed safely and ethically, but also asks you to demonstrate not only what realization principles you're using to achieve the ethics, but the actual evidence that you've taken those realization principles into action that can then be monitored against. We use it across Rolls-Royce. It is a mandated part of our digital product development and product safety process. We also use it with our suppliers. So we ask our suppliers to attest to the fact that they either use Alethea themselves or they have an equivalent trustworthiness and safety framework in their own organizations too.
At the heart of what you're espousing today is collaboration. Where does data sovereignty and data protection fit in there?
It's something that we inherited really from the work we've delivered inside Rolls-Royce, is that when we work in collaborations with organizations, they own their data sovereignty. It's their data. They will be the controller of that data. And if they choose to join a collaboration and share that data, there is a cross-licensing that happens within the collaboration to allow the participants to work on that data together. But ultimately, it still resides with the organizations whose data it is. And that's actually really important in the context of machine learning, because it's actually really hard to abstract away the model from the data that's being used for, just in the same way as it's very difficult to abstract away the output that you're looking for from the domain that you're trying to build that output into. So if you don't acknowledge the sovereignty of the originator of that data, then you are in a very tricky position, because you will eventually find it very difficult to actually generate real value from the deployment of any application that consumes that data. So that's our approach. In terms of how that then works out in a set of use cases around personally identifiable information from individual people, I will express a personal view on this, but it's not necessarily a view informed by the work we do on the industrial basis. I have always believed that we need to evolve a far clearer understanding of our own sovereignty, of our own personal data. I have been frustrated for probably the best part of 25 years that the multiple initiatives, My Data, for example, being one that I worked on 15 years ago as part of Telefonica, haven't really taken hold the way I would like them to. And I think that if we don't do a better job of helping our children understand quite how much value they're giving away every time they freely trade their information for a meme of a cat on a skateboard, then we're doing a really bad job.
Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Time flies when you're having fun. Caroline and I can spend hours talking, and then we decided maybe we should have 2 episodes. So this is the first episode. The second one is coming on Wednesday when we change roles.
Yeah,
Caroline will be moderating a panel. I will be the panelist, and we'll be discussing about how we should forget about Elon Musk and ask the man for AI to do more. Join me in thanking the fabulous Caroline Gorski, CEO of R Squared.